Not yet.
Good morning. I'm David Vaughn. I am president of O-Scale Central and a sustaining member of the National Model Railroad Association. For purposes of this clinic, which is about the life and legacy of John Armstrong, it is material that I am a member of the Washington, D.C. O-Scale Round Robin Group and the custodian following John Armstrong's death of much of his layout, of a portion of his equipment, and much of his project notes, photographs, and records. I am pleased to introduce John Armstrong to those who do not already know about him, but many of you who have been in the hobby for years know him as being the grand master of track planning and layout design. We'll talk about that today, but I will also note that he was also both very knowledgeable and very much involved in education concerning both prototype operations and model design and building. I want to thank NMRA, its president, Gordy Robinson, and the NMRAx coordinator, Speed Muller, for the opportunity to present this clinic. I also want to thank Nick Bulgarino for his work on our various O-Scale clinics, including this one. I want to start by talking about O-Scale 2-rail. We're going to talk about it. It fits in to a lot of the presentation today. O-Scale 2-rail is, of course, a minority scale. It's 1:48 or quarter inch to the foot, running on either 1 1/4 inch track gauge or a slightly different Proto 48 gauge. John Armstrong was a dedicated O-Scale 2-rail modeler and a member of the O-Scale 2-rail community. He very much enjoyed the special relationship between models, modeling, and the modeler, which 1:48 scale allows. It provides detail, heft, and the enjoyment of building that is difficult to replicate in smaller scales. For a rough comparison, O-scale is approximately 8 times the mass of HO scale, and so affords a lot more opportunity for detail, for ease of modeling, and a real special heft in the models. I want to tell you just a bit about O-Scale Central. John would want me to do that. O-Scale Central is the special interest group with the NMRA for O-Scale 2-rail. We promote the scale. We support OS2R modelers. We have a website, which is on your screen. We offer a scale-wide product and service guide for use by people who are presently modeling or are curious about the scale. It is free and it is found within the website. We also offer a lot of information on how to get started in 2-rail O-scale. We have a YouTube channel for O-scale 2-rail programming. We do outreach to NMRA conventions, railroad prototype modeler meets, and train shows. We have an online program, a quarterly journal, and offer an opportunity for modelers to join in and participate in the two-rail community. One of the activities that we have is the O-Scale National Convention. We have an O-Scale National coming up in Denver, Colorado, June 8 to 11, 2023. The website for that convention appears on your screen. It is going to be a terrific convention with a lot of cutting-edge clinics, some really good layout tours, a good trading hall, a model contest, and an opportunity to piggyback to do some rail fanning. If you've never rail fanned in Colorado, or if you want to go back, it is a terrific place to do it. And in fact, the clinician who I think is following this clinic, Michelle Kempema, is very knowledgeable about Colorado and has been working actively on the O-Scale convention. Ask her about it and ask her about Colorado rail fanning. I want to introduce the clinic itself, which comes in two parts. First, I want to tell who John Armstrong was and what he accomplished. He was at one point probably the best known model railroader in the hobby. He passed away in 2020, and so some memories may be getting a little stale, but he very much merits our continued attention. Second, I want to describe the substantive contributions to model railroading that John made, and in particular, to pull from those accomplishments things that present-day modelers can apply and learn from. I indicated my involvement with John through the Washington, D.C. Round Robin O-Scale Club and my work with his layout and equipment and projects following his death. John was born in 2020. He passed away in 2004. He started his model railroading in O-Scale, by the way, by 1931. So he would have been 11 when he started. He was dedicated from the start to prototype freelance. His layout was called the Canandaigua Southern, named after the town in which he grew up, and he operated it as if it was a prototype railroad, including producing annual reports and monitoring the equipment purchases and the layout and trains that he had. He was educated as a mechanical engineer at Purdue University. He was a boilermaker at that point, and I believe still there is a model railroad club called the Model Engineers at Purdue. He was very active there, and he started his creative model railroading very early. At the time he was attending Purdue, dual service 484s were very much the vogue in the prototype. He designed and scratch built a dual service 484 while he was at Purdue. Upon graduation, he was employed by the U.S. Navy as an ordnance engineer. He was assigned to the Washington Naval Yard and later to the Naval Research Facility at White Oak. He became the Wizard of White Oak with his institutional knowledge and intellectual curiosity over the years. He started his Canandaigua Southern Railroad Southern Division, the childhood layout having been the Northern Division, in 1950, and he used it as an inspiration and test for his designs. His first appearance in Model Railroader was in 1948. He won second place in a layout design contest. History has lost who the first person was, but they must have been very good. John was not only an active modeler, both with his own layout and with the projects we're going to talk about, but he was a prolific author. Mostly he worked for Kalmbach, including 2 extended series of articles about his layout. He was a civilian employee of the Navy throughout his career, and he had a wife, family, and a home in Silver Spring, Maryland. Next slide. John was also an enormous student of prototype operations. He acquired that through his intellectual curiosity. He never worked for the railroad, and eventually he became an associate editor at Railway Age, which is the standard publication that caters to the prototype, or as we say, 12-inch to the foot railroad industry. And among other things he did was to write a book called The Railroad, What It Is, What It Does, which actually dissects prototype operations, prototype engineering, prototype design, traffic, and every aspect of the railroad. And this was the best-selling book that Simmons Boardman, the publisher for a lot of prototype work, has ever done. It is still in print as an ebook, and it has been used by railroads to actually train their employees. But he had a number of other aspects where he applied that prototype knowledge, including, as indicated, his personal layout. We'll talk about that. Articles that he wrote about both layout design and model construction. The several books that he wrote, mostly focusing on track planning. The track plans he designed, both for his own layout, for publication in Model Railroader, for publication in his books, and in a custom layout design business that he later founded and operated, I think primarily to extend his curiosity about the potential for layout design. John was also a prolific presenter of clinics and speeches and seminars with the National Model Railroad Association. He was very active in it and very strongly supportive of that. The first set of articles that John wrote for Model Railroader were indicative of his overall approach to the hobby. Many model railroad layouts get described in the pages of MR and other publications, and they're generally fairly cursory in the way that they present. But John actually talked about the inspiration and the design of his railroad. He talked about how he actually did the track planning, how he built it, how he figured out equipment, and how he operated it. It was, as I said, a 4-part article. He did 2 series with his own layout, one in 1971, that's what you see on the screen, and one later in 96, toward the end of the construction. The introduction to the first article of the first series is one of the most grabbing quotations that I've ever dealt with in model railroading. I'll read it. Detailed planning of the Southern Division of the Canandaigua Southern, 1/4-inch scale, 1:48, began an hour after we had plunked down a payment on a suitable house in Silver Spring, Maryland. The delay, of course, was to avoid the appearance of unseemly haste after the 50-minute drive back to the apartment. John had me at unseemly haste And what he described, of course, is the excitement that any model railroader experiences when contemplating actual design and construction of a layout. John's own layout was, as I indicated, next slide, an inspiration for the various projects that he worked on, for the various ideas he espoused, and as indicated, he used it as an experiment. He designed the route to be sincere, his word for a layout in which the trains only pass through a given scene once during their traverse around the layout. And he did you will see on the layout articles that he talked about the way it had been designed and what he had to do to fit it into the layout. John also did something interesting, and I suppose it's an illustration of how to come up with a prototype operation-based layout. He unfolded the track plan and put together a lineal route, and as indicated on the drawing that he made, it indicates that this was a sincere layout. It also indicates both operational considerations internal to the track plan, as well as hidden routes representing off-stage other railroad lines and interchanges. John went beyond his layout to publish what is probably the most influential single book in model railroading, called Track Planning for Realistic Operations. It is, by the way, still in print now in its third edition, the cover of which is on the right. And what John wanted to do there, we'll talk about this in more detail, was twofold. Number one, he wanted the lessons that people would take away from his book to produce realistic layouts that at least worked to a great extent the way the prototype did. And the second thing he wanted was to make those layouts reliable. So he was teaching principles that could be used to make a working and workable layout. John wrote a number of other books, mostly through Kalmbach, published as a model railroader. And most of those books focused on his track planning and the layouts that he produced, exercising the principles that we talked about. John was famous for including, in addition to the layout itself, descriptions of how the layout would actually operate and where it fit in to the modeler's own ambitions and accommodations. John did write, by the way, the fact that these books, other than Track Planning for Realistic Operations, are no longer in print does not mean that they are not available. You can go on Amazon online or any other online book purveyor, or you can simply show up at train shows and you will find John's books fairly readily available. John operated, as indicated, a custom layout design service. On the left is a form he filled out for himself. It was an interesting process. People who wanted an original John Armstrong layout would write John, would get a reservation, would get a questionnaire, which we'll talk more about, talking about Gibbons and Druthers. And at the agreed upon scheduled time, he would undertake a layout and include not only a track plan, but rather detailed comments that illustrated how he was implementing the givens and druthers that the modeler had indicated he wanted. John wrote an entire series of articles and built an entire series of models. And consistent with his prototype freelance interests, he tried to work with his roster in a detailed way, including trying to make all of his models, regardless of their rather diverse origins, look as if they were part of a single integrated railroad. These are his project notes on what the steam locomotives on the Canandaigua Southern would look like. He kept detailed project notes of all of the models that he built and all of the layout projects in which he engaged. He had a number of individual models which became quite famous and were quite inspiring to other modelers. On the upper left-hand corner is John's Super Allegheny, which he designed in 1946-47. At the time, the prototype was designing 2666s, the famous Alleghenies that Chesapeake and Ohio and Virginia used. And they were really in a class by themselves in terms of efficiency and capacity. John decided he wanted a dual service Allegheny, which would require a larger front porch, a four-wheel trailing truck, and in his design, a streamlined casing. And so he designed and built in 46-47 the Super Allegheny. I think at one point that may have been the best known single engine anywhere in the hobby. As indicated, he built a dual service 484 at a time when those were just being designed by the prototype. In the upper right is a 210-4, which John adapted from a U.S. Hobbies brass Penzi J1. He was really committed to Belpaire fireboxes even when the PRR had not been, and so he included a monstrous sandbox and included his family look details. On the lower two models are two of John's workaday engines. On the left, a 080 based on a Penzi C1 and a consolidation based on a Penzi H. And he also worked to not only build but to design a very famous articulated cement hopper called the Cementipede. And he not only designed it consistent with prototype practices and built it in a way that he ran on his railroad, behind steam, by the way, but he worked from prototype practices, and in turn, the prototype followed him. Let's see the next slide. There we go. The Cementipede was designed at a time when Southern Railway was working for ever higher capacities with its Big John hopper and other projects. And so he was right there, but he was running out of axle loading for a single two-truck piece of rolling stock. So he articulated it and added a second set. His model was followed. I don't know whether it was inspired directly by, but it was certainly followed by prototype articulated freight cars such as the Santa Fe Super Hopper. So he was not only working consistent with the prototype, but the prototype was working consistent with him. John was an art aficionado as well as a really good modeler. He was fascinated by the Edward Hopper painting called Nighthawks, which is in the Chicago Institute of Arts, and he designed and built a model based on the painting. He discovered, by the way, that in the painting, Edward Hopper had fudged on a lot of angles and distances and so on. So he had to backwards engineer what a real cafe like Nighthawks would have produced. I note, by the way, that kits for Nighthawks are offered by witandwisdommodels.com, separate words joined by hyphen, witandwisdommodels.com. And coming from Wit and Wisdom Models will be models of the cementipede. Nighthawks is offered in all 4 major scales. Cementipede is going to start just with the actual O scale version, but we're open to doing something more later. All right, I want to talk about the gospel according to John. What did he say? What did he do? What did he focus on in terms of the teaching that he did, in terms of the principles he tried to inculcate with all of us, including me? He started with prototype operations. He wanted modelers to understand how real railroads actually work. And in track planning for realistic operations and in a number of his other projects and articles and books, he described prototype operations in ways that modelers could understand and adapt to their own layouts. He started with switching, why switching, how switching. He talked about building trains. Trains are not simply random collections of rolling stock, but are put into trains for particular purposes and in particular points of the train. He talked about moving trains over the road, how you dealt with signaling and passing sidings and dealing with meeting other trains, etc. And he talked about and explained how interchanges with other railroads works because prototype railroading is an integrated system consisting of multiple different railroads, and the cars have to travel from one railroad to the other to get to their destinations. He noted that prototype practices applied in model railroading add interest and reduce boredom or burnout. He not only tried to describe all of that, and he wrote well and he wrote very effectively, but he described how to take those principles and apply them to particular model railroads, building in, as he did, reliability. He built to standards, and he encouraged modelers to build to standards, not simply because you want your trains to stay on the track, although that's a good start, but it also allowed the equipment that you have and the operations you want to operate effectively. And he urged that the layouts be designed with operations in mind. To get discipline in that process, he described and pushed his modeler students to apply what he called givens and druthers. Givens are anything that impacts how the layout is going to be built, how it's going to be operated. That includes space constraints, dimensions, obstacles in the basement or wherever you're building it, doors and access. It also includes such things as the skill levels of the modelers, the time available. It includes what inventory and you may already have that you need to accommodate. and druthers are the things you would like, the things you want. Sometimes the druthers run head on into the givens. So you can have a fleet of big boys in your head pulling 150 car trains, but if you've only got a 1x4 piece of real estate to construct the layout on, that's going to be difficult. So one of the things that the forced considerations of givens and druthers do is to facilitate rational choices, so you design and build your railroads to increase satisfaction. And the givens and druthers were specifically made a part of his custom layout design business. But if you read John's designs and his articles and his books, you'll find that the principles of givens and druthers are made a part of the development of every part of his layout designs. So the features that he incorporated, almost regardless of the givens and druthers, were, as I indicated, to build to standards. If you build to standards, every piece of rolling stock on your layout needs to be able to work within those standards. And once you've got the standards, presumably they will all fit if you apply them consistently. Standards include things like minimum radius. It includes things like track spacing. It includes turnout numbers, how sharp they're going to be, and all of the other elements that you're going to take when you actually start designing and building your plan. He also used layout design elements. That enables you to construct particularly interesting parts. It enables you to start operating parts of your layout before the entire layout is complete. And although he did not call them layout design elements, that's a more current term, but he used those elements in the design and construction of his layouts. John was big on walking around and following your trains. Before John, it was common for small layouts to be operated by a single power pack in the corner of the layout, or even separated from it. And the layout, the operator would be in a single place. And in fact, even large model railroad clubs were typically operated from a single control place on one end, perhaps even up on the second floor from the rest of the layout. Even in O-scale, a layout being operated from 50 feet away is something less than impressive. So he advocated being able to walk around and follow your trains. That's what we're really doing, is following the trains. That gives us a lot of visual appeal. It enables us to control them better, particularly if you're talking about meets or switching. And he did it before we had radio control throttles, but the principles generally are applicable. We already talked about sincere layouts. He advocated paired industries. So he had on one end of a railroad would be a steel mill, and on the other end of a railroad would be a factory that used steel. And in fact, in extreme situations, he developed what they call loads in, empties out, pairing industries, so that by sleight of hand, you could always have loads going in, loaded cars going into where the layouts, where the industry is, and empties coming out. And he encouraged people to think creatively in that regard. What are the lessons from today? For today, I should say. And the things that he did are timeless. Many of the things he did are less dramatic than they were at the time, because the things that he advocated, the experiments that he made, the illustrations that he used, are now commonplace, but they are still important. First, he taught us to work with an integrated concept and to build based on that. You design and build to the standards. You take into account the givens and druthers. You make realistic decisions. Second, he had us draw from prototype practices to maximize interest. A Christmas tree layout round and around gets boring pretty quick. And if you don't build in ways to keep things interesting, you're going to get bored even on a larger layout. He advocated building in challenges like grades, switching puzzles, pinch points, and other operational challenges that every modeler and every layout would need to use to keep up interest. He urged designing and building so you can operate parts of your layout while you're building the rest. That includes, but is not limited to, layout design elements. He also made a point that we don't always have to finish a project that we start. We can satisfy our curiosity and leave it. We can have projects where we get into them and something better comes up. Don't be afraid not to finish a project. In fact, John resisted temptations to call projects that he had not finished as unfinished projects, because he thought that that connoted that he was going to come back at some point and finish them. And a lot of times he had satisfied himself as to the practicalities of the project or the limitations, and he had no intention of coming back. That's okay. John also advocated taking the hobby seriously. If you read his writing, he's really trying to make a lot of points. He's trying to make modelers work at their hobby in ways that will produce good results. But John never took himself too seriously. He was a great punster, and if you read any of his track plans, you will find them sprinkled with puns for place names and even the names of railroads themselves. And finally, John was a fan of the hobby community. He liked people. He was gregarious and outgoing. He had hundreds of friends, and he understood the importance of using the hobby to build relationships, to build friendships, to engage in things that are best done by groups. And he understood that the hardware, however interesting it might have been, was primarily just stuff you use to get people involved and to build relationships. Now, we have a little bit of time, and I want to talk a little bit about John as the modeler and John as the character. And so I'm going to give you 10 things you probably didn't know about John, even if you were familiar with his layouts and his projects. I just want to use them as part to indicate the whimsy with which John approached his modeling, as well as the creativity. First, part of that standardization, he designed his engines with liftoff boilers. And if you ever want to make a little wet spot, lift up one of John's engines, not expecting that, and having the boiler come off in your hand, but not the mechanism. He also weighted his locomotives. This was before you could buy depleted uranium, although I'm sure he would have been a fan. But his models, his big steam engines weighed more than 20 pounds apiece, and that really gave you the opportunity to appreciate the mass of O-scale. When those things clunk over a crossing where the rail is in steel, you really get the sense of mass that O-scale offers. John also abandoned many of his projects prior to completion, some because they failed. He was always willing to acknowledge that. Some basically because he lost interest, some because he found a better way to do it. I had the privilege, I guess you'd call it that, to disassemble John's layout, and I have most of it and have integrated it into a layout with two other heritage layouts. But the project started with having to disassemble John's Canandaigua Southern, which had never been designed to be modular or moved or anything else. Part of that involved separating the layout from its electrical components. And John may have been a great mechanical engineer, but as an electrical engineer, he would have gotten an F. Unless you think that good electrical practice consists of insulating 110-volt DC circuits with masking tape, which I found rather to my horror. John also worked on a very small budget. Civilian government employees did not make much. John had a non-working wife and 4 hungry children. When you look at his layout, you find that the sides of the turntable pit were built out of oil cans. The bearings were masonite, and he did a lot of other stuff using scrap lumber and so on, which you would not necessarily expect with someone who was as prominent and respected in the hobby as he was. I indicated before John's wit. He worked that into all aspects of his hobby. One of his more famous dinner presentations at NMRA convention was preparing a graph, one axis of which had the dimensions of layouts in square feet, and the other axis consisted of the probability of divorce. And he successfully used his mechanical engineering talents to establish that the likelihood of divorce goes up with the size of the layout that the modeler insists on. We've talked throughout about this, that John simply did not build engines and rolling stock. He designed them, and part of the pleasure that he derived was doing that in accordance with prototype practices. That's true in his Super Allegheny. It's true in his dual service 484. It's true in his Cementipede. He had other projects, lesser known, that tested some of those same principles. John's layout included very few home road freight cars, which is kind of interesting given his focus on prototype operations. We would expect approximately half of the freight cars on a given railroad would be home road. He had very few, and basically I think he just wasn't interested in that level of detail. Some of his ideas did not work. He acknowledged those and pulled the plug on them, short of investing more time than he had. By the way, one of his principles of looking at prototype and other modeling ideas was you want to stop your prototype research just before you learn things you didn't want to know. We could all use that. Sometimes that extra research gets us in trouble. And finally, although John was a tremendous student of prototype operations and had designed his layout in order to mimic those operations, on the Friday night sessions for the DC O-Scale Round Robin group, we generally ran trains. The great levels of details that it was possible to get into with interchange, off-road lines, consist building, etc., gave way to simply enjoying the experience of running the trains around the layout and having the conversations that the group was very fond of. So that is a quick trip through John's history, through his thinking process, and through the principles that he wanted to leave us with. Next slide. His layout, like every other layout, goes through some rather dramatic choices at the time the layout builder becomes disabled, moves, or passes away. And the family had to deal with the battleship in the basement and what to do with it following his death. Of course, the first thing that happens when you start putting a house on the market after an owner's death is you get a real estate agent who takes the tour, and the real estate agent goes down into the basement and comes up with a look of horror on his or her face and says, you got to get rid of the trains. And most of the trains, unfortunately, go out in the dumpster. Certainly the layout pieces do. I was able to, with the cooperation of the Armstrong family, to save, restore, and integrate large sections of the Canandaigua Southern, and I've acquired a significant portion of the equipment, including his locomotives, freight cars, his passenger train, his project notes, photographs, and drawings. I eventually was contacted by Model Railroader and asked to do an article for their Great Model Railroad annual. It appeared in 2016. It is still available, I think, from Kalmbach, and you can read the story of not only where it came from, but how it got there. I have enjoyed presenting John Armstrong's history and accomplishments and lessons for today. At one point, he was, I think, as I said, the best known guy in the hobby. And even though he has now been gone over 20 years, he still exerts a sizable and positive influence on modeling and on modelers. That's it. That is what I need to convey to you. I appreciate your attention. Thanks for listening. I don't know, given the schedule, how much time we have for questions or how we want to handle that in terms of a breakout session. I'm going to turn that back over to Speed and let him tell us.
Okay. David, I don't see any questions here. Of course, we had some technical difficulty. So thank you very, very much for an awesome presentation in the little bit of stressful time we had. So
thank you guys for seeing it through. The man behind the curtain, or the men behind the curtain this morning, were having considerable difficulties, and I thought they remained very calm, sounding like the pilots in the cockpit of an airliner that's in trouble, working through the different technical difficulties. But they did, and I appreciate their time and patience.
Thank you very much. Just for the audience, I'm going to slide in a technical difficulty slide, which is not exactly the case because I don't have the marketing slides up and running yet. So when the next music moves in and it says technical difficulties, just take a one of those whiteout bottles or maybe a white Sharpie and just cross it out on your screen.
Okay, and I think we're ready. There's one.
Okay, here we go. I think we're live. Welcome. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix. We're here in our second clinic, a little late today, but we will see where we can catch up sometime. Maybe you guys ask lots of questions and then we get short answers to them. Our next clinician is from the Colorado Model Railroad Museum.
Sorry.
Now I'm a
That was
wait
my
too.
timer from before.
Anyway, the Colorado Model Road Museum director, who won the Governor's Outstanding Tourism Worker Award in 2015. And here we are, 8 years later. For those heading to the O-Scale Convention in July or the National Narrow Gauge Convention, this presentation might give you plenty of ideas what to do before or after those conventions. Please welcome from Greeley, Colorado, Michelle Kempema.
Thank you very much, Speed. Sorry about my timer. I was making sure I was on time for everything today. I wanted to talk about what it's like to visit the railroads of Colorado. And so I put together what's called the Travel Guide to Colorado Railroads, and it's going to be kind of quick because there's a whole lot in the state. So I'm just going to give you my favorite highlights in the way that I would drive around the state. So we will get started by looking at a map of the state of Colorado. Now, excuse the lines that I drew over the roads. They are not perfect, but what I wanted you to see is that there's really 4 major ways to get into Colorado from the north, the south, the east, and the west. So I-70 divides our state across the middle from the west to the east, east to the west. I-25 goes north and south, and then you see there's a little diagonal one that goes off to the northeast. That is I-76. And it goes from Denver up to I-80, which goes across Wyoming and Nebraska. So Colorado is very easy to get to from all directions. So on this map, I've put oh, I have a typo in here. The railroads should say railroads, not museums. Sorry about that. The railroad crossing signs are where the railroads are, and the M's are where the museums are. So let's start around the state. So the railroads of Colorado, there are 8 major railroads that start and end within the state, start or end within the state. There's other museums that have rides, but these are kind of the main railroads that you come to ride in Colorado. There's also not on this list Amtrak, which goes through Colorado from Chicago all the way to California, but there's small rides that you can do on that. So we're going to go look at these. I also give you a list here of the museums and attractions. Again, major museums and attractions, there's probably 50 more small museums and really cool rail things to do, but there's just not enough time to tell you all about that. So I have mixed the museums and attractions in with the railroads as we go around the state. So I will be talking about these as we move around. So because I'm the executive director of the Colorado Model Railroad Museum in Greeley, Colorado, that's where we're going to start, because I think that all things should start or end in Greeley, where I'm at. And if you come to Colorado, I really hope that you come see us in Greeley and see this museum. Now, I've included these little road maps on the side just to give you a general idea of what it looks like to drive from, on this one, Denver International Airport, up to Greeley. It takes about an hour. It's really not that far. So what is the Colorado Model Railroad Museum? This is a question I get asked all the time. Honestly, we're America's largest HO scale, single track, fully dispatched model railroad layout. It's a fully interactive layout that you walk inside, and it sets inside this building. And here you can see most of the layout from the top corner, and the Colorado and Southern 1919 caboose over there should give you a little bit of scale. Instead of using a dime for scale, I'll just use a real caboose for scale. So I am blessed to work here and be the director of this place. And all the volunteers and staff and people that make this place happen are just so dear to me. And so I hope that if you come to Colorado, this is definitely on your list. So I also am going to include in this presentation other things to know in the areas that you visit. So what else is there to know about Greeley and Northern Colorado? We do set an hour north of Denver. We have an amazing hotel downtown called the Doubletree at Lincoln Park. Greeley also has a living history museum called Centennial Village that tells the story of all the settlers that came to create the communities we have today. We have a really cool character named Rattlesnake Kate, and that's a really cool story I will tell you if you come and visit. We also have a huge rodeo, the Greeley Stampede, and it's last week in June and goes until July 4th. Greeley is an hour drive to Rocky Mountain National Park, also called Estes Park sometimes, because that's the town that sets there. And we're also an hour from Cheyenne. So hour to Denver, hour to Rocky Mountain National Park, hour to Cheyenne. We're just the middle of everything in Northern Colorado. So where would you go next? I would send you to the Colorado Railroad Museum. Now we're the Colorado Model Railroad, and this is the Colorado Railroad Museum. They sit in Golden, Colorado, and it takes about an hour and 15 to get here if there's traffic. So you can see on the map, it's a pretty easy drive. And they have one of my absolute favorite locomotives. They have Rio Grande Southern number 20. And this is a photo that I took on its opening day there. The Colorado Railroad Museum also has Denver and Rio Grande number 491, and it's one of the largest operating narrow gauge locomotives. And they have a ride. It's not a long ride. They have a smaller space, so it's a circle, and you go around a few times on the circle, but you do get to ride behind their equipment. And they also have something really cool that's very unique to Colorado, and that is they have some of the galloping geese. And number 7 runs, and pretty often you can find that they're running this, and you can get a ride in the front cab area there and also in the back. So different ways to ride it. You can see there's some little kids about to get on. I love riding in goose number 7, and the galloping geese are just a really interesting piece of Colorado. And I'm going to talk about Ridgway right here, even though it's over by Durango. Ridgway also has a galloping goose that you can ride in. So 2 places in Colorado you can ride these. And then there's a goose, I think it's number 5, that travels to the Coombeers and Toltec and the Durango and Silverton throughout the summer. So that'd be the 3rd goose that you could ride. And you'll just have to look at those railroads and look up when that goose is coming to visit. So just a really unique piece of Colorado history. So the Colorado Railroad Museum has steam weekends throughout the summer. You'll have to look almost every weekend or every other. They do have steam ups and they're running steam. They're right near downtown Golden, and some other things to see there is the Buffalo Bill Memorial Museum, which is really cool. I'm sorry, not museum, just memorial, and the Coors plant. So they sit almost directly across the street from the Coors beer plant, which is a really cool place to tour also. They're actually really close to one of my favorite rail fanning spots, and this is one of the few actual rail fan things I'll talk about on here, but you can drive up Cold Creek Canyon to the east portal of the Moffett line within an hour of leaving the Colorado Railroad Museum. And it's a beautiful drive, and you might catch Amtrak or the Rocky Mountaineer on that line. So, okay, from here, we're going to go south to Colorado Springs. So now we're kind of looping around Denver and heading south. And we're going about an hour south down to the Pikes Peak Cog Railway, which is part of the Broadmoor, which is a resort, a very historic resort, owns the Pikes Peak Cog Railway. So what is the Cog Railway? A man named Zalman Simmons in the 1880s dreamed of going to the top of Pikes Peak, and he went on a hike, and it took him 2 days on a mule, but he decided it was the most beautiful thing he had seen. And so he wanted to create a railroad to allow people to do this up the mountain and see the top. And he'd heard of a cog, so he helped bring in the first cog and build the railroad. He is also the founder of Simmons Beauty Rest Mattresses. So there you go, kind of a weird connection. This is the world's longest cog railroad. And it does take you to the summit, which is 14,115 feet within 1 hour. So you are climbing the entire time. This is a picture at the summit. One of just an amazing view. You're almost always above the clouds, and it's always windy. But in this picture, you can see how we're way high above the clouds. They have a brand new visitor center that wasn't built when I was there to take this photo. But it's really neat, and they sell donuts, and I think donuts are an important part of any train ride or rail fanning day. So also, when you go to altitude like this, I know that some travelers are afraid of going from a mile high. Like you've flown in from the coast, you're now a mile high in Denver, and you go to the top of the cog. I would not recommend doing that on your first day. Give yourself a day or two to acclimate to the mile, then go on up to 14,000 feet, but take sugar with you and lots of water. So things to do in the Springs area. Obviously, the Broadmoor is a fantastic resort to stay at if you'd like a high-end 5-star luxury place. Stay there and ride the cog. The Western Museum of Mining and Industry is in Colorado Springs, along with the brand new U.S. Olympic Museum. And people probably don't know that most of the Olympians train in Colorado because of our elevation. Just really strengthens your lungs breathing up here at a mile high. Garden of the Gods is actually the most beautiful city park in America, I think. It's an amazing rock formation. And the Colorado Midland Terminal Railroad Roundhouse has its own Wikipedia, but honestly, it's a brew pub today, so you can go there and have a beer. So when we leave Carter Springs, we're actually going to head a little more south, and we're going to go to the Cripple Creek and Victor Narrow Gauge Railroad. Now look at this road. This is what happens in Colorado. Something is just on the other side of the peak, but you got to go all the way around to get there. So give yourself that hour and a half to go down Pikes Peak, drive around the mountain, and get down to Cripple Creek. The Cripple Creek and Victor Narrow Gauge Railroad is a little 040. He's a 15-ton locomotive, and they have about a 45-minute ride that takes you through the mining history of this area. It's just a fun little family day out. One of the fun things about this, though, is actually the town of Cripple Creek is adorable, and they have donkeys, like wild donkeys everywhere, and they have a Donkey Days celebration, and it's called Donkey Derby Days. And they also have the Molly Kathleen Gold Mine, which is one of the few gold mines that you go in and you go down an elevator down into the mine. So really interesting mine tour if you like those. So after Cripple Creek, we're going to, again, go around a mountain and come down to the Royal Gorge Route Railroad. So the Royal Gorge Railroad was one of the probably most fought over lines in America. At least famous gunfighters came to help solve the problem of whether or not the Rio Grande or the Santa Fe were going to own this line, because there's a steep gorge and there's only one way through it. So in the late 1870s, the silver mining, all the miners wanted to go. Two railroads decided to go up through there. The Denver and Rio Grande actually won the argument in court and paid $1.8 million to the Santa Fe to own this line. It is a beautiful rail line through a gorge. These photos are by Nick Valdez, who's the superintendent of the railroad, and he sent these to me. And this train ride is about 2 hours round trip. It's luxury. And I like to ride this one sitting at a table and having a meal, because the food on this train is fantastic. And I highly recommend it, having a meal on the Royal Gorge. Now, another attraction here, and one of the fun things about riding the Royal Gorge Railroad, is that you go underneath the Royal Gorge Bridge. So the bridge you can see in this photo is up above you, and it is the highest suspension bridge in North America. And when you're on it looking down, like when you're up here, the railroad is way, 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 way down there, and it looks like a Z-scale railroad. I like to combine these in a day. I actually prefer to go to the bridge first and look down and catch the morning train going out, and then go down and ride the afternoon train in the summer. And that way the sun will set after you've gone through the gorge, and you have a nice dinner on the train and come back. So just one of my favorite ways to ride it. There's lots of different ways to ride it. So that's the Royal Gorge Railroad. So it is located in Canyon City. The Royal Gorge Railroad actually owns their own Airbnbs. And so if you are looking for some really nice lodging, check their website before you go to Canyon City. There's also some other hotels there. I know there's like a Hampton Inn, and there's one little hotel across the street from the railroad that I stayed at, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's not bad. They do have a winery. They actually have the Holy Cross Abbey. The monks actually make the wine here. It's a great tour. And if you have your own car, Skyline Drive is a terrifying one-way drive around the edge of a gorge. So definitely worth doing. You can also whitewater raft down the Arkansas River, which is the river that goes through this gorge. And you, when you're on the train, you see all sorts of kayakers and rafters going by you. So after we leave Canyon City, we go on down to Pueblo, to the Pueblo Railway Museum. This museum is really interesting because of some of the artifacts that they have. And they also do have, I think, 1.5 miles of track. So they have some locomotives that run. This one is on display, but they have another one like it that you, they can take you on train rides. They'll actually give you caboose rides and cab rides. So this is a really fun one to stop at. If a cab ride has been on your bucket list, this is probably the most affordable place you will ever get a cab ride. They have a Jeep 9 that's really neat. They also have the history of the Transportation Technology Center. And they have these cars. You have to ask them because they're in a back lot. So this is Michelle's behind the scenes story. You got to go to their back lot and look at these things. These were the rocket cars that were being tested by the US government in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And now they're all donated here, and they're working on restoring them. So we've got all kinds of crazy things back in this little back lot here. So in Pueblo, they do have a beautiful Santa Fe steam locomotive on display. And this sets at a beautiful depot, the Pueblo Union Station is a beautiful, beautiful restored depot. It's now an event center. Sits in the heart of downtown where they actually have a river walk, like a small version of San Antonio. They have a really unique museum called the Center for American Values, and I highly recommend stopping in here, as there are 4 Medal of Honor winners in Pueblo, and they created this museum of values, and it talks about valor, integrity, and those things that make people great. Um, there's a museum of steelworking because there was a steel mill here. And there's an interesting restaurant in Pueblo called the Passkey. They serve a sandwich called the Grinder. It's an Italian sausage sandwich. It's from the steelworkers of the past, and it's just where you should eat if you're in Pueblo. So when we leave Pueblo, we're actually going to go south to Walsenburg. We're going to go over La Vida Pass, down through Fort Garland, San Luis, and all the way down to the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad. So the Cumbres and Toltec, I think, is one of the longest train rides in America as far as passenger trains. It does take all day to go one way, and there's 2 ways to ride it. So I really kind of wanted to spend a little time talking about the Cumbres and Toltec. On this map, not on my blue line, but a little bit higher, is Alamosa. And that's where you stay if you're going to leave from the Antonito side. All the hotels are in Alamosa, or you can go to the Chama end, which you can see Chama way down in the lower corner of this map. And there's a couple places there. So I'll go through that in just a minute. But I wanted you to see where Alamosa and Chama are, because those are the places you stay. So the Cumbres and Toltec was part of the Denver and Rio Grande. It was the San Juan extension. And in the 1960s, it was abandoned. But then in the 1970s, the state of Colorado and the state of New Mexico jointly bought the line and opened a tourist railroad called the Cumbres and Toltec from Cumbres Pass and Toltec Gorge. So it's got a really unique history. They have quite a few locomotives. They've got 484, 487, 488, 489, and 463, all operational. They have the historic cars that they would have had, and everything is worked on and built on site. Because this train ride goes all day, they feed you lunch in the middle. Here's a picture of I guess we just call it Osier, but this is like the house at Osier where everybody eats, and there's a buffet inside, and the views are spectacular. They also have a lot of the old buildings restored, so you can kind of walk through their museum outside of Osier. And lunch is good, and dessert is really good there. So I always look forward to lunch at Osier. This railroad crosses the state line multiple times between New Mexico and Colorado, so you get these great valley vistas. Here's coming back into New Mexico towards Chama in the fall, and so you can see it's just a beautiful ride. So in the area, let's talk about Alamosa versus Chama. In Alamosa, there is a locomotive on display. It's a number 169. It was a wood burner. Its sister 168 is actually restored and does run on the Cumbres and Toltec, so you can see that during special events. Places I like to stay in Alamosa, I like the Hampton Inn. I also like the Best Western. It's actually one of the older ones with the outside doors, but it's really nice and clean and remodeled, and so I like to stay there too. And there is a brew pub in Alamosa called San Luis Valley Brewing, and they make beers for the Cumbres and Toltec and the Durango and Silverton. So you can get some train beers at this brewery. Now, I do love to stay in Chama too. So when I go to Chama, there's a bed and breakfast called the Victorian that I like to stay at, and Chama Trails Motel. Now, if you're planning to stay in Chama, your choices are very, very limited for lodging. So you need to plan at least 6 to 9 months in advance, and you better call and make sure your reservations are there. So do some research before you just drive into Chama and think you're going to stay there. Okay, so after you ride the Cumbres and Toltec, you get off the train and you take the 2-hour drive over to Durango, Colorado. And now we're going to ride the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. And I know a lot of people know this one. It's probably one of the most famous ones in the world. It goes from Durango all the way up to Silverton. This is one of the most famous points, this rocky point here. The scenery here along the Animas River is beautiful. It's quite different than the Cumbres and Toltec, as that one's big valleys and you go through a gorge and you see some prairie. And this one follows one river and up through its valley. So they're just different. The Durango and Silverton also, again, Denver and Rio Grande. Both of these railroads have lots of films made through history on them. So that's something you can look up before you go. That's really fun. Durango and Silverton, you can do one way and ride a bus back, which you also can do on Cruisers and Toltec. You have to bus one way or the other, depending if you go on the all-day ride. But this one, you can go up to Silverton, you can bus back, or you can bus up and ride back. Pricing is different on those things, so you can look at that and see what you want to do. Here we are up in Silverton, and they also have these diesels. These are Alcos that came off of the White Pass in Yukon that they have recently repainted and have been running these for one of their morning trains. And my friend Cameron gave me this picture of this one. I didn't have a photo of one of these, but this is what it's like in Silverton. And then you walk off into the old town, and they have like the old West places to eat where there's like the player piano, and you know that the old gunslingers were in there. So it's just a fun place to visit. Coming back down, again, just beautiful views. You stop a couple times and take on water. And this shot, they're taking on water there at the locomotive. Beautiful scenery while you're waiting for that. And things to know about Durango. They have one very historic hotel called the Strater. It might be a little haunted. You can ask me about my stories sometime. You also have easy rail fanning on the Durango end, all the way up to the Rockwood station. After that, the train goes off into the valley and you can't chase it anymore. But it is kind of fun in town if you're in town to chase the trains in and out. They're also very close to Mesa Verde National Park, which is those cliff dwellings. And if you go down here, you should take a day and go see that too. Okay, so when we leave here, we're going to cut back across the state. So I talked earlier about going up to Ridgeway, which would be straight north. In this map, you can see there's Telluride and Montrose. Ridgeway is up above Telluride up there. And but that's not how we're going to get to Leadville, because that's the long way around. So you actually kind of cut back through Pagosa Springs, you go up through the middle of the state, and we're going to go to the Leadville, Colorado and Southern Railroad. Now, Leadville is known as the highest city in America, sitting at 10,158 feet. And you will feel it if you go straight there from Denver after you come into town. But it's fantastic. So they run diesels, and this train ride goes up to a little station they have where you get off the train and you have fantastic views of a valley. This is on a line that used to go from Leadville to the Climax molybdenum mine. And during World War II, the US government actually fixed these tracks up because they needed molybdenum, and then eventually sold it to this tourist line. So it is a neat ride. One of my favorite things about it is the fact that I can put my little blue speeder on it. So a little personal story here. If you're part of NARCOA, the North American Railcar Owners Association, they do 2 runs a year, and you can take your speeder all the way to the top of their line, which is up here by the Climax mine. And just to the left of my speeder is the headwaters of the Arkansas River, which eventually goes from this teeny tiny little bit of water into the big river that runs along the Royal Gorge Railroad. So if you want to really see Colorado, you need to go see all these places. So Leadville has the National Mining Hall of Fame, and it is a really neat museum. And the railroad owns this steam engine 641, and they have it on display. And Leadville's just a really cool Old West town. It's a mining town, so lots of little old saloons and things left over from the past here. So from here, we're going to come back down towards Denver on the Georgetown Loop. And this one actually was the Colorado and Southern also. When they abandoned it, the state bought it, and it is actually owned by the state of Colorado. So what is the loop? Why is it called a loop? Because of this gigantic bridge. To gain elevation quick enough, the only way to do it was to build this huge bridge, which has been here since the late 1800s. So that's kind of the big feature of the Georgetown Loop Railroad. It is a fun train to ride, in the fact that you can get off in the middle and do a mine tour, and the mine goes underneath the I-70 interstate, and you can kind of hear the cars way, 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 way above you through the rock. It's fun. They have a lot of fun little extra add-ons here, and you can tour their shops. They have some other locomotives they run. Most of the time you do run behind steam, but they do have a couple of these little diesel switchers that they can pull the train with also. This one is the original tourist line out of Denver. Since the 1800s, people have been going out of Denver to ride this railroad as a tourist. So that's why the state bought it and opened it again as a tourist line. So Georgetown has the most Victorian homes of any town in Colorado. I thought that was really interesting. The architecture in this town is fantastic. They do Christmas train rides, easy to get to out of Denver. It's just an hour out of town. It's just a neat little town. And you can stop in Idaho Springs on the way, and they have the Phoenix Gold Mine, which is one of my favorite gold mines to go through. So we're back in Denver. We've made the big loop, and honestly, every train I talked about takes a day of time. This is a 7-day trip. People think they're going to fly in and ride the Durango and Silverton in a day, and that doesn't happen. This is a long trip. It's a big state, and so just be prepared for that. So let's talk about Denver Union Station. You can actually get to Union Station from the airport on the A line. You don't even have to rent a car to get downtown. It has the Crawford Hotel inside it. This is what it looks like. It was built in 1881, burned down, and then rebuilt again in 1914 into this version of it. There used to be actually 2 model railroads in here, and they were in the basement. There was the Denver Society of Model Railroaders and the Platte Valley and Western HO. Denver Society of Model Railroaders was O2 rail O scale. And so we tell the story of the Denver Society of Model Railroaders at the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, because when the hotel went in, the model trains went out, and now they're conference rooms downstairs. There's a few hidden things in here that I like to talk about. At the O-Scale convention this year, I'm taking a tour to Union Station, and we're going to go through the basement and the archives and see the amazing Loving Cup that was given to David Moffett for the completion of his railroad by the people of Denver who loved him for saving the city. It's a really cool story. And so you also start here when you want to ride the California Zephyr. I talked about the Zephyr coming in from Chicago and then going on out to California. Well, there's a piece of this that's really, really fun to ride. And if you can scratch out 2 days of time in Colorado, I highly recommend doing this ride. So you get on in Denver and you take it to Glenwood Springs. It's a 6-hour ride through beautiful canyons in Colorado that have no roads in them. Only the train goes through them. And you spend the night in Glenwood, and then you can come back the next day. This is a picture of the Zephyr just cruising along one of the rivers. And this is a really affordable way to see this line, and family friendly. Take the kids on the train. There's a lounge car. You don't have to just sit in your seat the whole time. You can get up, go sit at tables, walk around. There's a snack car. It's just a really fun thing to do. And then also they run the ski train in the winter. And this is really fun because they take you right to the base of the Winter Park ski slope. Like, you literally put your ski boots on before you get off the train, because you are about 50 feet from the chairlift when you get off. So people love this in the winter. I ride it even though I don't ski, because just a day at Winter Park is really fun. They have snowcat tours. You take the gondola up to the restaurant at the top. There's just a lot of things to do in Winter Park. So the ski train is another winter option for riding a train in Colorado. Here's the Glenwood Springs, the observation car. So you can sit in these lounge cars and see out. A coach seat's all you need because you go to these lounge cars. And when I go to Glenwood on Amtrak, I use Amtrak's travel agents to book your hotel rooms and your hot springs passes, and you end up saving quite a bit of money. So that's just my travel tip for you. If you're going to ride this, work with the Amtrak travel agents. They have 2 specialists. They're both really nice. I worked with both of them. So that's how you do that. Now, there's one more train that also does this line, and this is new. They're on their 3rd year of operation. It's called the Rocky Mountaineer, and yes, that's the company that goes across Canada. It takes you from Banff and all over the beautiful Canadian Rockies. And now they've added the Rockies to Red Rocks ride. So you leave Denver, you overnight in Glenwood, and the next day you get up and you go to Moab, and you have choices in Moab of what you want to do. Here's what it looks like. So you can ride it both directions. You could start in Moab and ride back with that night in Glenwood. This is an all-inclusive train. When you ride this train, your meals, your drinks, everything is included. It is considered a 5-star luxury train. So it's going to cost a little bit more, but you're going to love it. It's like the thing you do on an anniversary or that once in a lifetime trip. They do have the Silver Dome cars. You can see one right as it's going into the tunnel here. In Canada, they have the gold dome cars, and those don't fit in our tunnels in Colorado, so they run these Silverleaf cars. And what they did is they added lounge cars to the sides along the train instead of underneath your dome car. So it's a really high-end and very nice experience. So you overnight in Glenwood, and I just talked about the silver service cars. One of my favorite things about this train, though, all the vestibules are open. So you can actually stick your head outside, feel the wind in your hair, and video Gore Canyon without a window glare. And I had waited 13 years to do this, and I finally got to ride it this year, and it was fantastic. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I know I went kind of fast. You can go back and pause and look at the links I have in there. But this is Colorado, and there's just so much to do here. So do we have any questions?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So the first one is, how many of these places are open in the winter?
Leadville is open all year, the Leadville train ride. The Royal Gorge is open all year. And Georgetown opens at Christmas with a Christmas train, and so does Durango and Silverton. They are open all year also.
Cool. Personal question, to how many of these places or trains have you been on or visited?
You know what's really funny? There's only one I haven't ridden, and I can't believe I haven't ridden it. I have not ridden the Cripple Creek and Victor. I have not done that, so it's on my list to do this year.
Cool. What museum would I go to in order to find information on the railroad that followed the Gunnison River?
The railroad that, oh, yeah, the Cimarron line. I would go to the Ridgeway Museum. They tell the story of that, and that's kind of the start of the Black Canyon to the Montrose in that area.
Cool. A few geography questions. How far is Aurora, Colorado from the Denver Union Station?
Okay, so Aurora is actually a suburb of Denver, and depending on traffic, that could be a 20-minute drive or an hour drive. So, and if they're talking about the O-Scale convention, there's a train that goes from where that convention's at. You can get on the A line and just go right to Union Station. So
Sweet.
That's a 15-minute train ride.
How far is Soundtracks from Denver? I know you know that one.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about the actual drive from Denver to Durango. I stopped along the way. If you drove straight from Denver to Durango, it's 6 hours. And Soundtrack sits in Durango, so 6 hours. You can also fly. They run daily flights.
Cool. Any books you can recommend for spending a whole month in Colorado?
Oh, books about spending a month in Colorado. Boy, I don't know. I live here, so I haven't ever really read the travel books.
Sorry, I read the question wrong, but it's still a good question.
Oh. Okay, what's the question?
You have people coming for a month, is what happened there. So.
Oh yeah, okay. So like, how do you take people around Colorado? Yeah, you divide out your weekends and try to do some of these trips.
So are there behind the scenes tours in many of these places?
Yes, there are, especially at the Colorado Model Railroad Museum.
How would you know that?
Because I usually am the person giving them.
So people just need to ask, or do they have to pay $1 million?
No, they just need to ask. And
Okay.
I'll tell you, the other place that has a behind-the-scenes tour that's free is the Chama Yard of the Kimbers in Toltec. They actually give you a map and let you walk around and look at the cool tipple and the water tower, and they just tell you to be careful, and they have kind of people all over to keep people safe, but you can walk around that rail yard.
Someone complained one day about stuff getting stuck in his socks because he walked too far off the track into the
Got too excited about seeing
into the
stuff
weeds.
and off.
So, well, Michelle, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
There are breakout rooms. I'm not sure if you're willing to go spend a little time
Yeah.
there.
I'll go there.
The link is werby.com/OMRG. That's Oscar, Mary, Rudolph, George. I believe it's also posted in the YouTube chat. Thank you, Brad. So we will see you soon, maybe at a convention or with another clinic.
Thank you very much. See ya.